Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. So my name is Mia Barrett, and I lead the Awareness Raising Unit at IOM's regional office here in Dakar. I'm going to hand over to Christopher Gascon, the Regional Director for IOM in West and Central Africa, and he's going to say a few words before we start the presentations.
Thank you, Mia. Good afternoon. I trust that you can hear me. I'm happy to say this is the first opportunity I have to speak to anyone in the region that recently arrived, so I'm happy to do it on this occasion. I've been looking at through the names. Actually, thought I might know some other than Mia. Nobody right off the bat, but it's a pleasure to meet you, at least virtually for now, until we have an opportunity to do so in person. Well, this year has been one of change, both how we work and how we live, and we've had to adapt a great deal, and to these changing circumstances, and we've had to do this quickly and efficiently. And this, for awareness raising, is nothing new. Awareness raising has never been a straight line or a fixed scenario. It's an ever-changing process, and embracing change is a cornerstone of getting it right. So over the past year, 3 components of IOM's awareness-raising approach have proven particularly useful. And the first one is flexibility. When the pandemic was declared in March, we were able to reorient awareness-raising to COVID-19 in less than a couple of weeks. This included a regional strategy and building a website for community engagement tools. While this was a major event, requiring a major response, flexibility enables us to react to small changes we encounter day to day. This could be a new digital trend or an environmental event. The second is continuous adaptation. When we decided to reorient our activities towards COVID-19, we simultaneously put in place a study to measure the effects of these actions. When doing awareness raising, we rarely evaluate only at the end. Rather, we build and repeated learning moments that allow us to adjust throughout implementation. If something isn't working, we need to know. Then, as a third element, is partnerships. Our partners on the ground, such as returned migrants networks, are critical in reaching the right audiences with the right messages. They are also an important source of feedback on what we are doing. And of course, our donors are key across all of this. It's only through their support and willingness to try new things that we can conduct such extensive research on our activities. These 3 components, flexibility, adaptation, and partnerships, represent how IOM thinks about awareness raising. It's a constantly changing process, guided by the evidence and targeted at the right audience. So I'll close by saying that the work that we're doing in awareness raising is really a cornerstone, and I've already said this, but of the work we do. Reaching out to migrants seems simple enough if you think about it, but yet it's extremely complex. We wind up always having a number of obstacles, and the only real way to do it is to be on the ground, is to understand what the people need, and to understand what we need to show them in a simple way, so that messages come across clearly. I've seen a number of offices in which I've been where we've done this, and more successfully, I think, over the years as we're coming closer to, as we're moving forward. And I've seen through the discussions I've had with our colleagues here that we have taken our awareness raising to a new level, much more organized, much more prepared, and much better organized to actually attend to the needs of the migrants. And we have to remember that people are relying on us, and a lot of the information we provide can make a big difference in their lives and can actually save lives. So I congratulate everyone who's working on this, your dedication, and I really hope that we'll have an opportunity to meet when I get out, when I'm obviously have an opportunity to myself to travel out to your different areas. So thanks a lot for your work, your dedication on this, and I'll now hand it back over to Mia, and I wish you a good webinar and learning process here. Have a great day.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. So over the past 2 years, IOM's regional office in Dakar has been working very closely with GMDAC, which is short for IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center. And much of this work has been centered on awareness raising, and more specifically, how can we improve the way we measure the effectiveness of the activities that we're implementing? So we want to know what works, we want to know what doesn't work, and we want to use this to design stronger and more impactful awareness-raising initiatives. So ultimately, our goal is to make sure that current and aspirant migrants, their families, and their communities have the tools they need to make informed decisions about migration. So the purpose of today's webinar is to share the lessons that we've learned from several GMDAC studies. There are various donors that supported the activities and the studies. So I just want to say a quick thank you to the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the UK Department for International Development, and the Italian Development Cooperation Agency. So today, as you can see on the screen, there's going to be 3 main presentations. The first is on lessons learned on the ground. The second is lessons learned online. And the third will discuss advantages and disadvantages between on and offline activities. We're also going to briefly outline our awareness-raising research plans over the next 2 years. A couple of very short admin points before we start our first presentation. So the first, due to the number of participants today, we will be taking questions in the chat box. So feel free to add questions and comments at any point during the webinar. We will address some of these during the discussion period at the end, and the rest we will be answering by email after the webinar. And the second point is that we are recording today's session, and we will circulate a link to it next week for anyone that's missed it, along with a French recording of the webinar. So I'm now going to pass this over to our GMDAC colleagues. We have Dr. Jasper Tjaden, Data and Impact Analytics Coordinator, Oumarou Hebie, Impact Evaluation Officer, and Esther Harman, Social Media Analyst.
Thank you very much, Mia and colleagues in the region, for the kind introduction. It's really been a pleasure to work with you over the recent years on different studies. I am grateful for the opportunity to present to all of you today some of the lessons we have drawn from various studies we've conducted over the past 3 years. But at first, I want to take a step back and discuss why we were first interested in evaluating campaigns. And in the aftermath of 2015, 2016, there's a lot of funding going into new approaches of awareness-raising campaigns. There were horrifying evidence of suffering of migrants on their route through Libya. As a response, IOM and others have developed a lot of new approaches to awareness raising. And the project sprung up all over the place. So there was a real growth in the number of campaigns. There was also a growth in diversification of the types of campaigns that were implemented across the globe, but with a clear focus also on African countries. There was a broadening donor landscape. More and more donors were interested in this field of work. But we discovered that there's a very limited evidence base. There is guidance out there on how to develop a campaign, maybe how to implement a campaign, but there were very few solid pieces of evidence on the actual effects that campaigns have on the targeted audience. So that's why we started with a systematic literature review, where we look at all the published studies that were available on the impact of campaigns, and came to the conclusion that few of them really have solid methods, solid approaches, limited reliability, but also just generally there are very few of them in the field of migration. So that's why we then set up a program to study the effects of campaigns more systematically. And I will show you today some of the learned lessons. Here's a list of completed works that we've conducted over the last 3 years. I will report to you today on a study in Senegal and Guinea. My colleague Esther will tell you some of the results from our online study, which actually is launched today in the context of the seminar. And we've also done other works on reviewing what others have done online. And we've recently published an edited volume where we sort of draw together all the lessons from these various works in a short chapter, a very non-technical chapter that we hope is accessible to everyone. If you are interested in these publications, feel free to click on these links here on the slide when we share the slides later with you. So first, I want to take 10 minutes here to present to you some of the key lessons from some of our on-the-ground studies. By on the ground, we basically refer to actual events, awareness-raising approaches where IOM is implementing events, in-person activities that we evaluated. And that is sort of in contrast to online activities where IOM is trying to engage with migrants just through online activities like Facebook, websites, and so forth. So next 10 minutes on offline, on-the-ground studies. So the first study that we did was in Dakar in 2019. We worked with the first phase of the Migrants Messenger project. The goal was back then, and it is today, is to raise awareness of the risks associated with irregular migration. It also includes various other components, but the particular component that we were interested in at the time is the risks aspect of these campaigns. The approach was a peer-to-peer communication approach. So returnees themselves were developing the messages. They were recording themselves, speaking about their experiences and sharing their testimonies. Those were cut together into a documentary-style movie, and then were screened at town hall events where returnees themselves engaged in the face-to-face discussion with peers that were themselves interested in migrating. This took place in Dakar, Senegal in 2019, and the main outcomes that we were interested in measuring here were risk perceptions, more generally, knowledge about migration, and intentions to migrate. What we were quite proud of, I have to say, is that we were able to apply what's called a gold standard in evaluation research and impact research, which is a randomized control trial. It's rarely possible in practice, but we were able, with a large team here, to pull this off. And how this works is that you basically divide your target groups, so in this case, potential migrants, and you split them randomly, and you invite some to your event that you're running, and the other half, you show a movie and a discussion that is not related to migration. And then in the end, you compare the two. And this has a lot of methodological advantages and gives us more confidence that our results actually are solid and refer to the clear impact that campaigns have. If there's more interest in this, happy to go deeper in the discussion or share more resources with you on the particular design. The second study that we did was in Guinea, 2019. The campaign was called Cinema Arena, also implemented by our own colleagues across the region, including Guinea. The campaign here was also to raise awareness of the risks associated with irregular migration. The approach was similar, but the differences in the details, so to say. The focus was on a mobile cinema caravan that went from village to village and screened a movie, but had a whole entertainment package around screening the movie in the evening. There were little theater performances, there were little sports activities, there were entertainment for kids and so forth. So the attempt was to really gather a whole little village around this event. And then in the evening, there would be screened a documentary-style movie showing testimonies of returnees, in addition to some fiction movies about migration. And at the end of the movie, there was again a discussion with the community about migration. Again, the key outcomes here were risk perceptions, knowledge, intentions to migrate. And in terms of the methods that we used for this report, we used a difference in difference approach. I'm not going to go in much detail here, but it's basically the second best option when it comes to impact research on how we can really rigorously look at the effects of campaigns. In the Senegal study, we surveyed about 1,400 potential migrants that participated in the activities. And in Guinea, we surveyed around 2,700 potential migrants that participated. So now the selection of results that we drew based on the analysis in these studies. First, we asked potential migrants, how well do you feel informed? And does the campaign increase the level of information that you perceive, that you have? And we found in Senegal that participating in the IOM events increased the self-reported knowledge about the risks and opportunities related to migration by 19%. Now, we also ask a large range of questions on different risks that can occur and the perceptions of risks and the intensity of risks for potential migrants. And we found that overall, participating in the campaign, both in Senegal and Guinea, increased the degree to which potential migrants perceive risks that is inherent in some of the irregular moves we've seen from West Africa towards Europe. I should note at this stage that the risk perception at baseline, so before any project happened, was already quite high. Generally, potential migrants do think that there are high risks, that migration is risky and dangerous. However, participating in the campaign further sensitized potential migrants towards particular risks that can happen and further increased general risk perceptions. We did find no effect, however, on sort of risks relating to the situation at destination. So what is life like at the destination? We didn't find many effects there, and it was mainly due to the fact that the movie very much focused on the journey rather than the life at destination. Now, we also found a fact that the views regarding returnees can be positively affected by campaigns. In fact, in Senegal, we found that participating in the IOM event reduced intentions and increased the positive view of the returnees, but also reduced the intentions to want to migrate irregularly. And at that time, that a lot of irregular moves would be associated with unsafe migration practices. So, second slide here on the two studies. We also included questions on whether potential migrants learned new facts about migration, any hard knowledge about how much it costs, how long the journey takes, how dangerous it is in terms of, for example, reported statistics on missing migrants and deaths, for example. We asked about the legal context of migration, but we actually found that the campaigns had very little to no effect on these knowledge questions. Why is that? We were a little puzzled by that, but in the end, it became quite obvious because the approach that both campaigns had was sharing very personal testimonials that were emotional and that were very subjective in nature, and they were portraying a certain version of migration that was not necessarily conveying facts, right? This was not a school-based instruction campaign that the main aim was to convey facts, but it rather was to let peers talk to each other and convey non-fact-based knowledge through that way. We also found that the campaign in Guinea improved the views of the economic opportunities at home by 19%. Now, what lessons do we draw from these two exercises, the two studies looking at awareness-raising events in Dakar, Senegal, and then events in rural Guinea? So what we found throughout both studies is that many potential migrants do lack information and they do want more information. And this might sound very trivial or obvious to many of the listeners in this webinar, but there are a lot of critics out there. There are a lot of studies out there and a lot of doubts about the general approach of information campaigns and general effectiveness of the overall approach. Because many argue that migrants are perfectly informed already and they don't really need any more information. And I think across our surveys, we always found that there's a huge interest in migration. There is a clear lack of information on various aspects of migration and a demand from potential migrants. We also found that campaigns can change risk perceptions, which we documented in both studies. They can change intentions. we do find that emotion trumps facts. We see that in other research in other fields as well, that often, communicating a message through emotions and through subjective personal testimonials can be more effective than just conveying facts, which are harder to remember and harder for the audience to connect with. Also, my message here is expectations have to be managed. We have to keep expectations realistic. There are a lot of expectations from the donor side. There are expectations from, of course, the implementer side. There are expectations from our target audience. But I think we could convincingly show that certain aspects of campaigns are effective. We see clear results, but it's not like everyone changes their mind or everyone benefits from a campaign. Right? It's a certain proportion of the audience that really is impacted and that shows a sort of change in perception, attitudes, and intentions. The information campaigns are an effective approach, but of course, not for everybody all the time. Not every campaign is going to deliver those results, but carefully crafted and narrowly defined campaign goals that are sort of as specific as possible really can have an impact. Please go online and download the report. We will share the links after. And with that, I will hand over now to my colleague Esther, who's the lead author of the study that we're launching today, and that takes all of what I've talked about online. IOM is implementing a lot of activities online through Facebook and other providers. And we were interested to learn, okay, how can we study the effectiveness of this online engagement? So thanks a lot for your attention up to now, and I hand over to Esther.
Thank you, Jasper. As Jasper has shown, the evidence base for offline campaigns has been gradually improving, but it still kind of remains unclear how online campaigns affect potential migrants. That's why we conducted a pilot impact assessment of an online campaign based on Facebook posts in Guinea, Senegal, and Nigeria in September 2019 and February 2020. Next slide, please, Jasper. Yes, so we looked on Facebook ads as a means of reaching potential migrants and delivering messages about the dangers of irregular migration. So we think that Facebook is a useful case study for this project since it has a large user base. About 2.5 billion people are actively using Facebook in the world, which is approximately 32% of the world's population. We focused on 3 West African countries, Senegal, Guinea, and Nigeria, since IOM is operating several online, but also offline campaigns currently there. And we used the Migrants as Messenger Facebook page as a platform to conduct our studies. So our study focuses on 3 main questions. So we looked at what is the best way to measure the impact of offline and online information campaigns. How can we measure the effectiveness and causal impact of online information campaigns, and how can it be evaluated? And we wanted to see if Facebook ads actually reach potential migrants in West Africa. So first of all, reviewed briefly the internet access, speed rates, and social media usage of potential migrants in West African countries, also compared to other countries in the world. And we wanted to assess the effects of Facebook engagement. That's why we conducted 2 different split test experiments on Facebook's ad platform between September and February of this year. And we used the Migrants as Messengers official Facebook page for that. We defined effectiveness as the degree to which targeted audience engage with the campaign. This includes clicks, views, likes, shares, and comments. And in the first phase of our split test experiments, we also conducted an online survey on the Qualtrics platform to validate whether the engaged audience actually represents potential migrants. So during that survey, we asked the questions if you consider if you potentially considered to migrate in the next 2 years. So this is the setup of the first phase of experiments. This is the pilot split test in Nigeria. So we tested different variations, urban versus rural and male versus female, since we wanted to see how an urban versus a rural audience and a male versus a female audience would engage with our ad. And we targeted the 4 largest cities in Edo and Delta State. And for the urban ad sets, and targeted the same people in the state, but excluded the 4 largest city for the rural audience. And on the right side, you can see how the setup was. So we used testimonial videos from the Migrants as Messengers campaign and linked to the Qualtrics page to our survey. So this is the second round of experiments. So in the second round, we tested a static image versus a video, since we wanted to see if actually a static image might perform better due to internet speed rates in West Africa. And we asked people to hit the like button if they consider to potentially migrate in the next 2 years. We also used testimonial videos of the Migrants as Messenger campaign, and this was also in Nigeria, but the setup was the same in Guinea and Senegal. So we found in our results that the Facebook usage in West African countries, so in Guinea, Nigeria, and Senegal, on an average is only 16%. If you compare it to other countries, that would be 63% on an average in Germany, Singapore, and the USA. And if you compare the internet speed rate, it would take 5 hours for a Senegalese person to download a 5 gigabyte movie, compared to 10 minutes for a Singaporean person. So while the reach was high, the engagement was pretty low overall if you compare it. So only 1 in 10 people who were actually reached by the ad also viewed the video to the end. And fewer than 1 in 1,000 people actually engaged with the video by liking it, and fewer than 5 in 10,000 people shared or commented on the post, and fewer than 3 in 10,000 people who saw the ad actually also completed the survey. And yes, next. So this is how the ad reach looked like compared from urban and rural audiences. So as you can see, the ad reached much more people in urban areas than rural areas. This is also due to the fact of population density. What we saw in the ad setup as well, Facebook gives you a potential reach. And it's obviously much lower in rural areas than it is in urban areas. And so the engagement per 10,000 people reached on Facebook was, we reached basically 1 in 10 people who saw the video also clicked on the link to the Qualtrics webpage. That was in Guinea. In Nigeria and Senegal, it was slightly less. And but only 1 person actually in Guinea completed the survey, compared to 3 people in Senegal. So that's pretty low, since we don't really know if we reach potential migrants, and the survey was basically our means to find that out. If you see the engagement, so to measure that, to measure effectiveness, 1 in 10 people actually engaged in Senegal with the video by playing it to the end. So if you look at the cost benefits of Facebook in comparison, or of online campaigns in comparison to offline campaigns, it's actually, it kind of narrows substantially when you consider that on Facebook, you don't really know if you reach the intended target audience. So we looked at that as well. Jasper, can you click the next one? So So yes, so when you look at the cost per capita, so offline versus online information campaigns, you can see that, so we took basically cost per person offline as an attendee of an offline event and compared to survey completes. And you can see that it's actually cheaper, or like the cost per person offline is actually much lower than the survey complete online, the cost per capita. And yes, so also, since we skipped that on the slide, so you can also read in the report that the static image performed always better than a video, and no matter if in rural or in urban areas. And some of the lessons we learned during the study was that while online campaigns might be low cost and gives you like the potential to reach 1,000 people in a very short time, they have a huge trade-off, and that's that you can't really measure the outcomes and impact clearly. And that especially in low-income countries, Facebook penetration is generally low, just 20 to 40%. Internet speed is slower, and the user composition may change over time. That's something you have to take into account when you have online campaigns, and that it's also always better to target cities, since the engagement and reach is much higher there, and it's better from the study we found that it's better to use a static image than a video. And since organizations are mostly using Facebook as a means to reach potential migrants online, it should also other platforms such as Instagram and TikTok should be taken into account to reach younger audiences. And this was only like a pilot study, but definitely further research is needed. And yes, so the report was launched today, so you can download it under the link. And yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Esther, for this concise presentation. We're now going to hand over to our colleague Oumarou, who's going to present some very recent results from an ongoing study on COVID-19. Over to you, Oumarou.
Thank you, Jasper. Yes, I'm going to briefly talk about this COVID-19 study that we have conducted recently. As you probably all know, the context is that the world is facing this COVID-19 pandemic, and due to that, many countries have taken measures to reduce the contact between people, and it was then very difficult for awareness-raising activities to be on the field. So we at IOM we have thought it was a good opportunity, good on the bracket, to use the platforms we have to promote safe behavior regarding COVID-19. So an IOM West and Central Africa COVID-19 awareness raising strategy has been then developed, and we began the implementation on March 20. So it involved 12 missions and 4 regional projects, and we used for that 2 main data collection tools. We had a tool used to collect data on all the content created. So for each content created, we had a tool to collect some kind of data related to the content. We also had a tool filled in monthly, which collected the social metrics, meaning the metrics we had on the social platforms. The period we covered for this study, the study started in March, mid-March, end March, and stopped on, let's say, August, end of August. Next. So in terms of preliminary results, we've got for the whole period for the actors I listed previously, 101 contents were created. Most of these content were videos, because we had videos, photos, street art, things, many other things like that. But most of the contents were videos anyway. And also what we noticed is that, of course, the involved organizations inside IOM had the possibility to use any language they want. And we noticed that most used English, and only 15% were in local languages of the region. Also, in terms of content, of course, most of the content were related to COVID-19 prevention measures, hand washing, physical distancing, and mask wearing, etc. Few of them joined migration thematics to COVID-19. And in terms of platforms used to share the content, I mean, social platforms used to share the content, most of the content were shared on Facebook and Twitter, mainly on Facebook, 76%, and a few on Twitter. Very few were shared on other platforms like Instagram and YouTube also. In terms of reach, regarding the content that were shared, the lowest reach we've got the lowest reach in March and the highest in July. And also one thing we noted in these preliminary results is that post and engagement has the same trend. Next slide, please. So in terms of preliminary lesson learned, because we are continuing to analyze the data and collecting additional data regarding this study, we noted that the fact for us at IOM to have some flexibility in leveraging existing structures enable us to quickly react. To give you an idea, I think, for example, for most of the region most of the countries in the region, the measures were taken at yearly March, and we were able to engage awareness raising online at mid-March, end March. So it was quite quick. One thing also that we think we should learn from this study, and we will learn probably from this study, is the few percentage of content that included that were made in local languages. I think it should increase the target, the audience of the content that are shared on the platforms, if it is in local languages. So as you have seen in the previous slide, this is not the case for this study. So one thing also that we noted, and which is quite interesting to investigate further, is that Facebook posts that were much more than other posts, particularly Twitter, got less comments than Twitter posts, which is quite interesting. Why, with less posts, we have more comments on Twitter than Facebook? This is something that we will investigate more. Also, we noted that most of the posts, we have on the social medias were more appreciated, had more engagement from March to June compared to when the pandemic was slowing down in most of the region's country. And we will further investigate also this aspect. So this is the end of this part of the presentation, and I will give the floor to Jasper to continue with the comparison between online and offline, the pros and cons. Thanks.
Thank you, Oumarou. We have two things left to do here. First, I want to draw another comparison between offline and online. See what are the trade-offs here, also involved, maybe relevant for colleagues in the field that are now listening in. And then after that, we want to sketch out what our next steps are for this agenda, providing more and more evidence on the effects of campaigns and learning from that to continuously improve programming in this area. So I'm going to take 2 minutes here and then hand over back to Oumarou to sketch out our next steps. First, the on-the-ground versus online. Quick reminder, if you do have questions, please write them in the chat function. Even if we may not have the time in this meeting to answer all of your questions, we'll get back to you via email. So please do share any thoughts or questions that you have. All right, on the ground versus online. I presented on 2 studies we've done on events that happened, in real life, face to face, and Esther presented results on online activities, Esther and Oumarou did. On the ground, the clear advantage is that you have actual face-to-face human interaction, right? And if you want to get a message across, that's often more effective than sharing information online. You cannot, when you don't have a real human being in front of you. The other advantage is that with on-the-ground events, you have a clearly defined population. You can organize the event in location A, B, or C. You can, you could target a religious community. You can target a town hall. You could go to schools. You could target youth. You could target, the leader of a community. So it's if it's happening in real life, face to face, you can really target your population. And this is better if you want to have a certain impact on a particular population. And a fact that makes people like me and my colleagues happy is that it's easier to assess the impact as well, right? It's easier to learn from those activities because it's clearer who you're communicating with, and you can ask them for feedback right away. On the con side, though, it can be more demanding, of course, right? It requires more resources, more logistics, probably a bigger team of staff that is implementing those events, measuring it and collecting data. And therefore, you're also going to have a smaller reach compared to online. With a couple of clicks online, you can reach hundreds of thousands of people. With a series of 10 events or so, you may reach 5,000 max. So there is a clear difference in the number of people that you may reach. But what we're trying to unpack with our studies was to what's the effect on those people that you actually reach. And there we have a big question mark with some of the online activities, and it's more obvious for face-to-face offline engagement. Now, on the online side, clear pros, I've already mentioned some of them. The reach is large and the cost is low. We have done this ourselves, but you can set up a campaign fairly quickly at fairly low cost, reach a lot of people. And what reach means is just that a particular message or post pops up on somebody's wall. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaging with it. And that's what we try to show through our study. Obviously, you have very little costs for logistics, right? You don't have to organize a caravan, a truck, and a team of people that display a movie every night of the week in different rural areas. You have none of that. It's basically a couple of staff that are familiar with the Facebook ad manager and online communication and so forth. So it also offers a lot of flexibility in terms of what you post. If you want to change your message tomorrow, you can change the post, right? If you do have a particular format for a campaign in place and you're rolling it out in a region, it's harder to change the program in a quick way. So that's another advantage of online engagement. But as we've highlighted, and as Esther highlighted, there are clear downsides as well. So in many areas that where we're operating, there's limited internet access. The internet speed is very slow, and sometimes the usage of certain providers like Facebook is also low. So the question is, who are you reaching? And any campaign that is going out there should first do some analytics on what is the narrow target group that we're targeting, and then how can we reach those people? And online might be one tool to achieve a certain aspect of a campaign, and can be complemented with others. Now, it is difficult online to reach potential migrants because, Facebook doesn't tell you who is a potential migrant. It's not like there is a drop-down menu and can click target this to potential migrants. You can make selections based on age or social demographics, also interests, and finely grained sort of attitudinal selections that you can make. However, you cannot target migrants particularly. And we've seen that in our survey. Very few of the people that were exposed to our posts actually said they were potential migrants, they're interested in migration. So that's one of the big limitations here. And then lastly, sad news for folks like us at GMDAC is it's very difficult to measure the clear impact. And there are new and better ways to do it, and we have to explore more, but it is definitely trickier. The methods are less established compared to offline campaigns. So that's my quick sort of comparison between offline and online, summarizing some of the results we heard earlier. Now, I'm going to hand quickly over to Oumarou again, who will sketch out our next steps for the research. And then I hope we'll, in the end, have 10 minutes to answer some of your questions. But if your question is not brought up, we'll promise to get in touch with you bilaterally and answer this via email. Oumarou, over to you.
Thank you, Jasper. So in terms of next steps for our research agenda regarding awareness-raising campaigns, we are strongly interested in detecting causal effects of our awareness-raising campaigns. For that reason, we are working now on 4 more rigorous studies to be conducted in the region. Mainly, we want to answer some very interesting questions like what the campaign change in the behavior of the potential migrants. As Jasper mentioned it at the start of this presentation, there is very few evidence on that. We also want to know whether campaigns work in different contexts. Does it work better in rural or urban? Does it work in specific setting, etc.? These kind of questions are what we want to address. Also, we want to know whether the personal network and the communities do influence the potential migrants. We know that in our region, in the region of or in West and Central Africa, communities play a central role in some aspects. So is it the case, for example, in migration? And also we want to know whether the online activities compared to offline activities, what could be the best in terms of cost effectiveness to have. So these 4 impact evaluation studies will be conducted in the Gambia, Guinea, Nigeria, and Senegal. And of course, you will see the result at the end. So in terms of COVID-19 study that I presented recently, we have some further investigation to do there. For example, we want to know whether the contents shared, created by in institutional setting, for example, IOM, perform better than non-institutional. For example, contents created by return migrants without any logo from any institution. We want also to know whether there is a topic effect. So meaning that does the content perform better in terms of engagement in the online if it is on a specific topic. We also want to know whether there is a type effect or whether it changed anything on the people that have seen it online behavior. So this is one intermediate outcome that we want to check. And eventually we want to know if it matters to publish on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So does it really matter which platform we publish on? So these are some next things we want to address in our current work. I will give the floor to Emily for next.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to list a few questions that have been put in the chat. As said before, we won't have time to answer all the questions in this chat right now, but we will take the time to answer everyone's questions by email at the end. So for a first question, we have from Tim Krapp. And he said, his question is, could you say something about the role of influentials like family members, religious leaders, etc., in either supporting the message as part of the project or adversely affecting the impacts? So in awareness raising and motivating positive behavior change, influentials like family, friends, religious leaders, those who have direct or indirect influence of the key target audience are key. So it's key to adopt a multi-level approach with awareness-raising projects so that you can create a supportive environment to support the messaging that is being promoted in the project. And it's also important to work with these different levels of influence because that is one way that false information can be transmitted as well from one person to the other. So it's important to work with many different levels so that you create this supporting environment for positive behavior change and for sharing messages about the risks of irregular migration. So for another question, I'm going to hand this over to Jasper. This question is from WamBuGT2, and he asks, I'm curious to know how long had the interventions been going on before the RCT study? How long was the RCT, and how did you control for contamination of the control group? What were the challenges? Also, did you match participants between the two groups?
Thanks, Emily. Very brief follow-up on the first question as well. I think one interesting finding we do have on the influences is that parents are, the role of parents is, there's a risk that this might be misunderstood sometimes, because there is this sort of assumption sometimes that parents pressure their kids to move, right, to provide future income and diversify the household income. In most of our surveys that we've done, we do not seem to confirm that assumption, right? Most people do not feel pressure from their parents. In contrast, a lot of people actually go without even telling their parents, right? So I think this is something we have to look at closer. And parents are certainly always discussed as one relevant personal influence, but there are many others, as Emily mentioned. So I just wanted to add that quick fact that we found. In terms of the RCT, I really invite you to find it online. We have a large annex there, dozens of pages of annexes with tables and a long description of the methods. In a nutshell, we invited in different 8 neighborhoods of Dakar 8,000 potential migrants. We screened them basically and said, are you generally interested? And then randomly invited them to events or not. And through this randomization approach, which we later confirmed worked out, they're actually comparable. Both groups are comparable. So there was no need for any statistical matching. How we avoided contamination is that the events were far enough apart that there was a limited risk that the same people would attend both events, or that other events sort of were happening at the same time. We did, however, ask respondents whether they consumed other information, whether other events took place in the vicinity, whether they attended other events. And if they did, we excluded them from the sample. So in a nutshell, but I always like these more technical questions. Do please check it out online. And if there are any additional questions, I'm happy to follow up with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we have another question on Esther's presentation from Maria. So the question is, what kind of options do you see for evaluating impact of social media on behavior and awareness increase?
I'm going to hand over this question to my former colleague, Gustavo, who has also been co-authoring the study.
Esther, that's a great question. And I think the report goes into a lot of detail why this is difficult. In an ideal world, we would implement RCT, like the study that Jasper presented at first, where we could isolate different groups so that we could isolate the effect, whether we are changing behavior, which we know from a lot of research is very difficult to affect, or changing awareness. In this study, we tried to measure the change in awareness through a survey that was delivered after the intervention, which was someone seeing the advertisement. And so we found that it's quite difficult to do this through Facebook. There's a lot of factors in how social media is set up that make it difficult to isolate these effects. These algorithms are designed to show the advertisement to certain people even more times, which creates a lot of bias. Facebook and other platforms do have or are developing tools to create experimental design that can cleanly isolate these effects. I think Facebook calls its tool an impact lift study, but a lot of times these are very limited. They're only available to huge customers or huge companies that have a big account with the organization, and you have to work with the social media organization directly. So in short, there are some tools that are being developed. They're very difficult, and so I think this methodologies are still developing.
Thank you, Gustavo. Another way to do it is just enroll people in a survey through Facebook, which is also difficult in our study, right? Because people usually hate answering surveys online. But if you did manage to get enough participants that maybe see the post on Facebook, but then click on it, go to another site, enroll in the survey, then you can follow up with them through other means. But more research is needed on how to do that more successfully. Yeah. Okay, Emily, any other questions?
Sorry, and Jasper, we're just going to read one more question. I think we have time for just one more. So this question is again for you. Why do you think that the RCTs improved self-reported knowledge, however, not actual factual knowledge? Could it be that migrants only think they have more knowledge, but actually do not have more knowledge? What other measures can we use to measure knowledge, increased awareness?
Wow, you gave me a really easy one to the end there, Emily, but let's see, we could talk a long time about this, but so I think there's an important distinction which hasn't come out clear in how I presented the results. So you ask people, how well do you feel informed generally, right? Not necessarily, do you have all the facts? So information, I think, is a broader term. It could be like, how well do you know risks, or how much information do you have? Do you know people that are abroad? So it's a much more broader concept than knowledge, where our knowledge questions were very specific. Do you know this, or what is the number of X, right? And if they got it right or wrong. So I think there is, how I presented it, it makes it look there's a sort of a contrast there, but in reality, how the questions were worded, there isn't really one. But you raise another interesting hypothesis, which we're also looking at the moment, is to say that maybe people misrate their own behavior, their own knowledge that they have. This is most probably true, right? We see that actually there's no connection between how much people say they know and how much they know actually based on our knowledge question, right? So you could say I know a lot, but actually you don't. Or you could say I don't know nothing, and actually you're better informed than others. So this self-rated information, there's definitely some noise in there, as you would say, and that's something we want to look at closer. It also applies to risks, for example. You may perceive large risks on an abstract level more generally, but do you think those risks would apply if you migrated? Would they apply to you personally? Very different concept, different question. And why may people think it's generally dangerous? Maybe they think, well, but it won't happen to me, right? So these are some of the more nuanced questions we're now addressing with our further research. And there are other interesting research initiatives out there that look at these questions. I'm happy to share those details with you in the follow-up. Okay, thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so this now brings us to our final slide. Just a few points here. First, we would really appreciate your feedback on this webinar. You can click on the survey link in the chat box now. The survey will only take a minute. All the questions are optional. But to make sure that you're on the mailing list to receive the materials that we presented during this webinar, as well as the answers to the questions in the chat that we didn't have a chance to address, please enter your email address into the survey. Secondly, as I mentioned at the start, we will be circulating a French recording of this webinar next week. And finally, if you wish to contact any of us, please note our email addresses here on the slide. So thank you again so much for participating. We're really pleased that this topic is of such wide interest. We're super excited to see how many questions and comments have come in on the chat. And I really hope that the findings presented today have been useful to you. And yes, please do feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.